What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with the best cheap 5G Android budget smartphones of 2022. I've got 5G compatible devices here that all come in under $300. So let's get started. Now, starting off, we have the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. This device is a relatively new phone, and it is the successor to last year's Galaxy A12. Now with the Galaxy A13 5G, we're getting a very large 6.5-inch display. This display is actually 90 Hz, which is really awesome, and it features PLS TFT technology. Now despite being a 720p display, it actually looks pretty crisp and clear here. We have a PPI of 270, a 20:9 aspect ratio, so a more narrow but taller form factor, and we're getting an 81.1% screen-to-body ratio. So a little bit of a thicker bezel on the bottom and a water drop notch up top, but in general, a pretty good design here. Now in that water drop notch is a 5 megapixel front-facing camera. Now with this device, we are getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage, along with microSD card expansion. So I definitely appreciate that despite this being a lower-end 5G device, we do indeed have 64 gigs of storage. In fact, all of these devices have at least 64 gigabytes, and that's a really good thing because nowadays, especially as apps continue to get bigger and bigger in file size, you're going to need at least 64 gigabytes overall. And then having microSD card expansion, of course, is a great way to offload photos and videos, for example. Now, there's no wireless charging with the Galaxy A13 5G, but we do have a fingerprint sensor on the power button. We'll give that a try right now. And it works pretty well, not necessarily the fastest out there, but it does at least get the job done. We also have Face Unlock with this phone as well, so I do appreciate that we have multiple methods for accessing the device. Now on the back side of the phone, we do have a triple camera setup featuring a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera to take close-up images, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera for portrait mode. And this phone does support portrait mode with both the rear and front cameras, which is really awesome. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with this phone, we're getting 4 gigabytes of RAM paired up with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor. So that processor, as the name implies, does allow this phone to connect to 5G, which is certainly a good thing, especially nowadays, as that's essentially the new standard. So if you go with any of these devices, then at least you'll know that you'll be able to connect to some of the latest and greatest wireless networks as time goes on. Now I did run a benchmark test using Geekbench 5, and here's the scores I got from that test. What I recommend doing is running that test on your current phone and then compare your scores to these scores to get a better idea of whether or not any of these phones are actually going to be a performance upgrade from what you currently have. Now with this device, video recording does max out at 1080p for both the front and rear cameras. We're getting a 5000 mAh internal battery, which is really awesome. And this phone also supports NFC, or at least in the US, it has NFC. This phone is made completely out of plastic, besides the display, which is glass, and that does apply to all these other phones as well. On the left side of the device, we just have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card. Then on the right side of the phone, we have the power button, which is also the fingerprint sensor, volume down and then volume up. Then up top here, we have the noise-canceling microphone. And then on the bottom of the device, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and we have the speaker. And then on the back of the phone, we have the triple camera setup, the flash, and the Samsung logo. So in general, a pretty minimalist finish on the back of the phone, just a matte black finish. So I do like that it doesn't pick up too many fingerprints, but at the same time, there's not a whole lot going on the back of the phone. Now moving on to the next device, this is the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Now this device has already been a very big success, and OnePlus really is giving us a lot here for a lower-end 5G phone. Now the display on this device is 6.49 inches, so slightly smaller than the A13 5G. However, with this device, you can see that the front-facing camera is situated in a hole punch in the upper left of the phone, and that front camera is 16 megapixels. I certainly do prefer having the hole punch for the front-facing camera rather than having a water drop notch like we're getting with all the other phones mentioned in this video. In addition to that, we are getting an IPS LCD display, which does support 90 Hz refresh rate, so you are getting a faster refresh rate similar to the A13 5G as well, which is really cool, kind of gives the phone a nice premium touch. One interesting thing though is that This device does have a 1080p display, which is really good and especially impressive. So I'm a big fan of this display. I do think it does look really good. It's nice and bright and clear, and excellent for video viewing or web browsing. Now we're getting a PPI of 405, we're getting a 20:9 aspect ratio, and we're getting an 83.7% screen to body ratio. So a little bit of a thicker bottom bezel, but in general, a pretty slim profile overall. Now this device does feature 64 gigabytes of internal storage, which is great. It also supports microSD card expansion, so you can also offload photos and videos. There's no wireless charging with this phone, but we do have a fingerprint sensor on the power button, which we'll give a try right now. So very fast and responsive. One more time. There we go. And we also have face unlock with this phone as well. So it is pretty feature packed. Now as far as the cameras go, we do have a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera to assist with portrait mode, which is supported on the rear and front cameras, and we have a 2 megapixel macro camera. So in general, quite a few cameras on this phone. Definitely a fan too of the overall design and finish of the device. I really like this frosted finish on the back. It does still pick up some fingerprints, but it really does make this phone look a lot more premium than really any of these other phones. Now as far as RAM and processor go, we're getting 4 gigabytes of RAM paired up with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. So this is the only phone of these 5 that does have a Qualcomm processor. So if that's something that's important to you, then this phone is definitely worth considering. Now I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test with this device as well. Here's the scores. I'll say in general, this is pretty impressive, especially for a lower end phone. And then with this device, video recording does max out at 1080p with the front and rear cameras. We're getting a 5,000 milliamp hour internal battery, and this phone does feature NFC, which is really good as well. Now I already talked a little bit about the hardware here. Again, in general, I feel like this is the best looking phone of these 5. Certainly looks very premium in general, which is great, even though the phone is made completely of plastic, besides the display, which is glass. On the left side of the phone, we have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card, volume up, volume down. Then on the right side, we have the power button. It's also the fingerprint sensor. Then up top here, we have the noise canceling microphone. And then on the bottom of the device, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, we have the microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the speaker. And then on the back of the phone, just the camera module with the flash and OnePlus logo. Now next up is the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G. Now this phone features a 6.5-inch display. It is a TFT display, however it does support 90 Hz, at least the US model does. We have a 720p display on the phone with a PPI of 270, so it does look pretty nice in general. Definitely curious to know what you think about the device. We have a 20:9 aspect ratio and an 81.6% screen to body ratio. So very similar to the A13 5G. We do have that water drop notch up top and the thicker bottom bezel. And honestly, looking at these two phones side by side, they look nearly identical, which is pretty interesting, but they are different. Now the front-facing camera with the Galaxy A32 5G is 13 megapixels. Now this particular model of the device does feature 128 gigabytes of internal storage. However, that could be different based on where you're getting it from, and what region, and also what carriers you're getting the phone from. So keep that in mind. But the device does support microSD card expansion. We have a fingerprint sensor on the power button, which does work pretty well in general. Give that another try right now. There we go. And then the phone also features face unlock. Now taking a look at the camera module on the back, the device does have a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle camera that can take images at up to 123 degrees. We have a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera and a 5 megapixel macro camera for close-up images. And this phone does support portrait mode for both the rear and front cameras. Now this device features 6 gigabytes of RAM paired up with the MediaTek Dimensity 720 5G processor. So as the name does imply, the phone does support 5G. With this phone, I got a single core score of 504 and a multi-core score of 1670, which overall is pretty decent. Now this phone does support 4K video recording with the rear camera, which is really nice, and it supports up to 1080p with the front-facing camera. Now this phone has a 5,000 milliamp hour internal battery and does support charging at up to 15 watts, which is really good as well. And this device does offer NFC, but that could be different for you based on what region and what carrier you're getting the device from. On the left of the phone, we just have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card. Then on the right of the phone, we have the power button, which is also the fingerprint sensor, volume down and volume up. Then up top here, we have the noise canceling microphone. Then on the bottom of the device, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the speaker. And then on the back of the phone, we do have that quad camera setup. Now this is plastic on the back of the device, but the glossy finish does make it look a bit more premium. I would have preferred it to be a matte finish though, but I suppose this works as well. Now next up, we have the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G. Now this device is not officially sold in the US. However, if you are in the US, you can certainly buy one. I will be linking to it in the video description. But this phone is most likely popular in regions outside of the US. So you might be familiar with it based on where you live. But essentially with the A22 5G, Samsung's really packing in a lot of value here. So first thing is, we're getting a very large display at 6.6 inches. We're getting a TFT display that is 90 Hz. So we are getting that faster, more desirable refresh rate with this phone. Another really nice bonus too is that this phone has a 1080p display. We're getting a PPI of 399, a 20:9 aspect ratio, and an 82.3% screen to body ratio. So there is a thicker bottom bezel, and we do have the boring water drop notch up top, similar to many of these other phones. But I at least like that we are getting that 1080p display, and in general, this phone is a really nice looking handset. Now the front facing camera is 8 megapixels. This model of the phone comes with 128 gigabytes of internal storage, and the device supports microSD card expansion up to 2 terabytes. Now there's no wireless charging with the phone, but we do have a side-mounted fingerprint sensor on the power button, and that is nice and responsive, definitely very accurate, probably one of the more accurate fingerprint sensors out of all the various ones here. And then the device also supports Face Unlock, which is really good as well. Now taking a look at the camera module, we do have a triple camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide angle camera that can take images at up to 115 degrees, and we have a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera to assist with portrait mode. And this device does support portrait mode for both the front and rear cameras, which is really good as well. And then with this device, we're getting 6 gigabytes of RAM along with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor. So I'll show you the results I got from the Geekbench 5 benchmark test, but essentially I got a single core score of 561 and a multi-core score of 1726. So that's really good, especially for a lower end phone like this one. Now video recording with this device actually maxes out at 2K using the rear camera, so that's pretty interesting. And the phone supports 1080p video recording with the front camera. Now the battery capacity of the A22 5G is a 5000 milliamp hour internal battery, and it does support 15 watt fast charging. Now I'm a big fan of this finish on the back of the phone. It's a nice frosted plastic finish, and I really like this color as well. In general, I just think it looks really good, and I like how it also doesn't really pick up any fingerprints. But taking a look at the left side of the phone, we have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card. On the right side of the phone, we have volume up, volume down. Also have the power button, that's also the fingerprint sensor. Up top, the noise canceling microphone. And then on the bottom of the device, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the speaker. And then on the back of the phone, we just have that camera module and Samsung logo. And then for the final device of this video today, this is the TMobile Revel V Plus 5G. Now this device was launched in the summer of 2021, and as the name implies, it is exclusive to T-Mobile and Metro by T-Mobile. So if you are located outside of the US, then you probably won't end up getting this phone because it is only sold in the US and at 2 different carriers that are essentially just one carrier anyway. But I figured I'd still show you the phone because I know a lot of my viewers are located within the US. Now with this device, it does feature the largest display of all these phones at 6.82 inches. So a very big display, which is really good for video consumption and reading articles, maybe also reading ebooks on your device. It's great for that. We're getting an LCD display at 720p. We're getting a PPI of 263, and we're getting a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So this is also the tallest form factor of any of the displays out of all these phones that I showed you today in this video. Now the front-facing camera is 5 megapixels, and we're getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage with the phone. Now there's no wireless charging, but we do have a fingerprint sensor on the right side of the device. So we'll give that a try right now. Very quick, one more time. Nice and responsive, that's great. And then the phone also supports Face Unlock as well. Now on the back of the device, the camera situation is a little bit of a mystery. Now the phone does have a 13 megapixel main camera, and the phone also supports portrait mode for the front and rear cameras, so I'd imagine that one of those other cameras is a depth sensing camera, but I'm not sure what the third camera is for. I couldn't find a macro mode anywhere within the camera app, so I really don't know. But at least we do have portrait mode, and then we also have a 13 megapixel main camera, so that's pretty good and pretty consistent with most of these other devices. And then with this device, we're getting 4 gigabytes of RAM, and we're getting the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor. So I did also run the same benchmark test with this device, and I'll show you the scores right now. Single core score of 541 and a multi-core score of 1692. So actually some of the best scores out of any of these phones. Now this device supports 1080p video recording with the front and rear cameras. We're getting a 5000 mAh internal battery, and it does come with Android 11, and it's essentially a stock version of the software. There really aren't any bonus features added in necessarily. For the most part, you're just getting some Metro apps pre-installed. On the left side of the phone, we have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card. We have volume up, volume down. Then on the right side of the phone, we have that power button that is also the fingerprint sensor. Then up top here, we have the noise canceling microphone. And then on the bottom of the phone, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and we have the speaker. And then on the back of the device, we have this really cool matte finish. It does pick up some fingerprints, but I really like how there's kind of this magenta stripe in the middle of the back panel here, showing off the T-Mobile logo. In general, I think it is a pretty decent looking phone, given that it is more of an entry-level 5G device. So in conclusion, I think all of these phones bring at least something interesting to the table here. However, I've got to say that out of all of these, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G does stand out, because we really are getting the most features from this phone, minus maybe not having an ultra-wide camera, but everything else about this device is very premium. So this probably is my favorite one out of all of these. However, I have to give credit to the A32 and A22, because those phones are the only two out of all of these that have an ultra-wide-angle camera, which is definitely a feature that I do really like quite a bit. But in general, I would say that I would go for whichever phone is being offered at the best deal, because there tend to be different deals with various phones as time goes on, whether that's from the actual company that makes the phone or from the carrier that it's sold through. So if you do want to actually get a phone through a carrier, then I probably would just see what is being offered as far as, what's being offered for free if you're switching in from another carrier, or what upgrade deals are going on. But if you see any of these phones on any sort of list of phones that are offered for various promotions, then I would definitely look more into it. And again, in general, I think all these phones are good in one way or another, and hopefully this video gave you a better idea of how they all compare. But these are the best cheap 5G Android budget smartphones of 2022. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you liked it, sub to the channel. But this is Kevin here, and I will see you in the next video. Take care and have a great rest of your day.